It began with a shadow box. Not the kind you buy at a craft store, but one that had been locked away in an attic for nearly 30 years, the wood faded, the glass pane cloudy with dust. No one knew what was inside, not really. It belonged to a family who thought it was just another relic of a relative's paranoid phase, some old keepsake from a military base no one talked about anymore. But when a storm ripped the roof loose and the box finally broke open, something tumbled free. A letter folded neatly in brittle paper, stamped with the insignia of a general, and beneath it, medals none of them had ever seen before. The kind of decorations awarded in silence, not on parade grounds. And at the top of that letter, in sharp, commanding ink, was one phrase: Tempest Aura. Evacuation executed. Lives saved, because of her. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if you still believe vigilance is never wasted, even when everyone else laughs at you, make sure to like and subscribe. Because this isn't just a story about guard duty. It's a story about what happens when the person everyone overlooks is the only one who refuses to stop looking. Her name was Sergeant Lila Moreno, and she wasn't supposed to be a legend. At least, not the kind of legend that shows up in briefing manuals decades later. She was 27 when she was stationed on the perimeter of Falcon Ridge Compound, a training base nestled in a valley where the sunsets painted everything copper and the nights came down harder than anyone liked to admit. To most, her assignment was a joke: gate duty, watchtower rotation, the kind of post young soldiers groaned about and old ones smirked at. But to Lila, it mattered. It all mattered. She had that kind of posture people remembered: straight, precise, never slouched, as if even her shadow stood at attention. Every evening when the others shuffled through their checklists with one hand on their phones, Lila kept her eyes on the tree line, her ears tuned to the hum of the generators, her pen scratching notes in a worn black notebook. She was always writing. Not novels, not journals, just records, timestamps, wind shifts, odd glitches in the surveillance feed. Things no one else noticed or bothered to. And for that, she was mocked. Quietly at first, then more openly. Some called her paranoid, others rookie cop with a clipboard. Even her commanding officer joked that she'd memorized the squirrels by rank and serial number. Lila never snapped back. She just kept watching. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that vigilance was all she had ever trusted. She had grown up in a neighborhood where mistakes got people hurt, where ignoring the wrong noise at night could mean the difference between safety and tragedy. She learned early that silence wasn't empty. It was full of warnings, if you were willing to hear them. And so by the time she put on a uniform, that instinct was already carved into her bones. At dusk, when the copper light gave way to shadows, Lila felt most alive. That's when she walked the perimeter, slow and steady, her boots tracing the same path she had memorized down to the cracks in the asphalt. While the others scrolled through their phones or leaned against their rifles telling stories, she adjusted locks, tightened bolts, and tested the comms line for interference. Every small detail logged, every deviation marked. It wasn't paranoia to her. It was preparation. Cadet Harmon, barely 20, once laughed out loud when he saw her bent over a fence post, noting how the lock had shifted by half an inch. "Moreno," he said, shaking his head. "You think the enemy's gonna bring a ruler to check our padlocks?" Lila only glanced up, her expression calm. "Locks don't move themselves." He snorted, slapped his buddy on the shoulder, and walked off, muttering about how some people needed hobbies. But Lila didn't need hobbies. She had her post. In her black notebook, a pattern was forming. Strange static bursts on the radio at exactly the same time 3 nights in a row. A faint power dip in the East Sector lights, never longer than a blink, but always at 21:47. Odd behavior in the perimeter drones. They hovered slightly longer in one zone, as if their sensors were distracted. None of it was enough to raise alarms, but together it unsettled her. She mentioned it once to Lieutenant Cross during briefing. He chuckled. "Moreno, it's a base, not a ghost hunt. Relax. Drones hiccup, lights flicker. If you spent less time playing detective, you might actually enjoy your shift." She said nothing more. But that night, she stayed an extra hour, walking the fence line in silence, jotting notes under the pale beam of her flashlight. There was a rhythm to her evenings. Check the locks. Scan the feet. Pause at the south corner where the valley opened widest, her eyes always adjusting to the shifting shadows between the trees. Then back to her booth for black coffee. Always black, no sugar, and a page of notes written in neat, sharp strokes. Even her handwriting was disciplined, each word measured like a step in formation. Her peers didn't see it. They saw a young woman who was too serious, too rigid, too obsessed with her little notebook. They dismissed her as someone who had missed the point, that guard duty was supposed to be boring, that it was safe enough to laugh through. But they were wrong. Lila knew it in her gut. Something was coming. She couldn't prove it yet, but the air felt heavier at dusk, the silences deeper, as if the valley itself was holding its breath. And then one evening, just as the sun bled out over the horizon, the drone returned. Its rotors buzzed softly as it hovered down to her booth, its lights blinking in steady rhythm. She raised her hand, as she always did, to run a routine diagnostic scan. But before she touched it, a voice crackled through its comm unit. Clear, deliberate, and impossible. Tempest Aura. Activate evacuation plan. The words froze her. For a second, she thought it was interference, maybe a prank. But she had heard them before. Not here, not often. Just once, during a classified orientation session 2 years ago, when a visiting colonel had briefly referenced deep contingency codes, protocols that were never meant to be spoken aloud unless the worst was imminent. One phrase had burned itself into her memory, Tempest Aura. Now, a drone, nothing more than a programmed sentinel, was whispering it to her. She stood perfectly still, her breath caught, the notebook pressed against her chest. The valley was quiet, the base alive with the faint hum of routine. And yet those words hung in the air like thunder waiting to break. She knew, then, that her notes weren't paranoia. They were prophecy, and dusk was only the beginning. The words echoed in her ears long after the drone's rotors faded back into silence. Tempest Aura. Activate evacuation plan. Lila Moreno stood there, notebook pressed to her chest, her pulse steady but deep. She didn't panic, didn't shout, didn't scramble for confirmation like some might have. She just breathed in slow, keeping her eyes on the tree line, the horizon now painted in dark bruises of twilight. She had always known dusk carried warnings, and now one had spoken. Her training said report anomalies immediately. Her instinct said choose carefully whom to tell. Still, protocol mattered. She clicked her radio. Control, this is post 3, she said, her voice calm, professional. Requesting line check. Drone unit relayed unauthorized message. Static hissed back. Then a voice, Lieutenant Cross, unmistakable, with that usual sharp edge of amusement. What kind of message, Moreno? Did it ask for a bedtime story? Laughter rippled faintly in the background, voices from the briefing room feeding off his tone. Her jaw tightened, but she stayed even. Verbatim transmission. Tempest Aura. Activate evacuation plan. Recommend escalation. The channel went quiet for a moment. Then Cross's voice came back, dripping with disbelief. Tempest Aura? You serious? That's a code from doctrine files no one even uses anymore. Probably just corrupted software. Drone caught some signal bleed, that's all. A second voice chimed in. Corporal Harmon, the same cadet who'd mocked her measuring locks. Moreno's notebook probably told her the moon winked at her too. Careful, LT. Next thing you know, she'll be filing reports about ghosts on the fence line. The room erupted in muffled chuckles. Lila let the silence wash over her. She could have argued, could have reminded them of the static patterns she'd logged for weeks, of the precise power dips at the east sector lights, of the drone's unusual hover time. But she didn't. Instead, she wrote the timestamp, 21:53, neatly in her notebook and circled it twice. Lieutenant Cross finished with a dismissive snort. Stand down, Moreno. If Command wanted us running Cold War evacuation drills, we'd know about it. Keep your eyes open, but stop seeing things that aren't there. Out. The radio clicked dead. In her booth, the hum of the old lamp overhead filled the quiet. She poured another inch of black coffee into her dented thermos lid and stared out at the shadows swallowing the perimeter. She wasn't angry, not at the laughter, not at Cross. She had expected that. What unsettled her was how deliberate the drone's voice had been. It hadn't glitched or stuttered. It had spoken like a soldier giving orders. She flipped back through her notebook. Lines of neat handwriting stared back at her. Static bursts. 21:47 3 nights in a row. Light dip. East sector. Always less than 2 seconds. Drone hover time, quadrant 7, 17 seconds longer than programmed. She tapped her pen against the page. Alone, each note looked trivial. Together, they looked like a warning spelled out in silence. Lila glanced at the drone again, now docked and dormant. "Why me?" she whispered. But she already knew the answer. Not because she was special, because she was the only one still listening. So she prepared. Quietly, carefully. She walked the perimeter again that night, slower than usual, her flashlight beam tracing fences, culverts, shadows between storage sheds. She checked every latch, pressed every weak spot in the chain links, memorized every inch where the ground dipped or the brush pressed close. At each anomaly, she made a chalk mark, small, discreet, something only she would recognize in the dark. At the south corner, where the valley opened wide to the tree lean, she crouched low and pressed her palm against the cold dirt. The ground was soft, freshly disturbed. Her breath caught, but she didn't speak, didn't call it in. She just marked the spot in her notebook. Unaccounted ground shift, southeast quadrant, 2212. Back in her booth, she sketched routes, alternate paths through the compound if systems went down, choke points that could become traps if lighting failed, shelters that could hold evacuees if command froze. Each one she labeled with single letters, simple enough that if she needed to explain quickly, even a half-trained recruit could follow. By midnight, her coffee was cold, her eyes rimmed with fatigue, but her notebook was alive with arrows, sketches, and codes. She closed it gently and slipped it into the breast pocket of her jacket, close enough that she could feel its weight against her heart. The next day, whispers traveled through the compound. Moreno heard voices as she walked past the mess hall. Drone whisper, the code lady, Miss Apocalypse. Soldiers chuckled as she passed, some nudging each other with smirks. She didn't respond. Didn't need to. But one cadet watched differently. Private Alina Vega, 19, still green, eyes wide with the raw sharpness of someone who hadn't been broken into cynicism yet. She approached Lila during shift change. "Sergeant," Vega asked, hesitating. "Yes, Private. You really heard it?" "The code." Lila met her eyes. "Yes. And you believe it means something?" "I believe," Lila said quietly, "that silence always means something. And the worst mistake you can make is ignoring it." Vega nodded slowly, thoughtful. Then she saluted, awkward, but sincere, before jogging back to her post. That night, Lila returned to her booth early. The dusk settled heavy, the sky an iron gray before sinking into black. The drone hovered again, silent this time, its rotors humming steadily as it landed in its bay. No words, just blinking lights. But she didn't need them anymore. She could feel it. Something was shifting, pressing closer, testing the edges of their complacency. In the command room, laughter still rang. Lieutenant Cross told the story again, embellishing. She looked at that drone like it was Moses bringing commandments. More laughter, more dismissals. But in her booth, Lila flipped to a fresh page and wrote 3 words at the top in sharp black ink, Tempest or aloft. And beneath it, in smaller letters, prepared routes marked. Evacuation ready. The compound slept that night. Lila did not. Because she understood something the others refused to. Warnings don't repeat themselves forever. They arrive once. Then the storm comes. And when it did, she would be ready. The storm didn't arrive with thunder. It arrived with silence. At exactly 2:17 a.m., Falcon Ridge compound went dark. Not the flicker of a bad bulb or the sputter of a failing generator. This was complete, suffocating blackout. Floodlights around the perimeter cut off mid-beam. Security cameras blinked into nothing. The radios hissed with static before falling dead. For the first time in years, the base slept without its electric heartbeat. Inside the barracks, recruits stirred, muttering in confusion. Some laughed nervously, assuming a drill. Others cursed, fumbling for flashlights. In the command post, Lieutenant Cross barked into a dead headset, his voice rising sharper with each unanswered call. The officers who had chuckled at Lila Moreno's notebook were suddenly silent, their confidence evaporating into the dark. But Lila? She was already moving. She hadn't slept. Not really. Ever since the drone had whispered those words, she'd known the silence between dusk and dawn was different now. She had been at her booth when the blackout hit, thermos still warm in her hand, notebook open. The moment the lights died, she stood, clipped her flashlight to her vest, and walked out into the night like she had been waiting for it. The valley air was heavy, damp, carrying the smell of wet earth. She moved along the fence line, her boots steady, her breaths measured. And then she saw it. The southeast culvert, marked in her notes, was disturbed again. Mud pressed down in fresh imprints, not cadet boots, but wider, heavier, more deliberate. 2 sets, not running, coordinated. She pressed her hand against the ground. Still warm. They were inside. She raised her radio, but static clawed back at her. Communications were gone. So she did the only thing left. She trusted her own preparations. Pulling a piece of chalk from her pocket, she marked the culvert with an X, then turned back toward the compound. As she moved through the dark, she tapped 3 quick marks on the storage shed door, one of the coded symbols she had drawn in her notebook. To anyone else, it was nothing. To her, it was a signal, route safe. Evacuate here. Back in the command post, chaos reigned. Officers shouted over each other, fumbling with dead monitors, arguing about grid failures and system overrides. Cross slammed his fist against the console, cursing. "This is sabotage," he barked. "Secure the barracks, lock down the mess hall, get me a status report." But no one moved. No one knew what to do in the dark. And then the first alarm sounded. Not from their system, but from outside. A sharp, piercing crack of a disabled latch. Then another. Intruders were already moving, and the compound had no eyes to see them. It was Vega, the youngest, the one who had believed, that spotted Lila's chalk marks first. She stumbled out of the barracks with 3 recruits clinging to her, saw the symbols glowing faintly under flashlight, and followed them without hesitation. One path led them safely out of a choke point that would have trapped them when the intruders cut power to the secondary gate. Word spread quickly in whispers, "Follow Moreno's marks." While Cross shouted into silence, Lila's quiet codes guided squad after squad through the compound, steering them away from dead zones, towards safe zones, until order began to form in the dark. Soldiers moved like they finally had a map again, because they did. It was in her pocket. At 2:34 a.m., the emergency generator kicked in. Floodlights blazed back, cameras flickered alive. But the damage was done. 2 intruders were already gone, slipping back through the culvert with stolen drives and equipment. The compound had been breached. Cross stormed into the control room, furious. "Who let this happen?" he shouted, slamming logs onto the desk. "Who didn't secure the fence? Who ignored the protocols?" The answer came not from an officer, but from a notebook. Lila Moreno stepped into the room, her uniform streaked with mud, flashlight still clipped to her vest. She placed the black notebook on the console, opened to a page filled with precise timestamps, breach intervals, power dits, and route sketches. Her handwriting was calm, controlled, undeniable. "You were warned," she said simply. Her voice wasn't raised, wasn't angry, just steady. "You chose not to listen." The room went silent. Cross's face flushed crimson. "You should have told me directly," he snapped. Lila met his gaze. "I did." For a long moment, no one moved. Then the recruits who had followed her marks into safety began to murmur, their eyes fixed on her, not him. Respect doesn't arrive with rank. Sometimes it arrives with proof. By morning, the whispers had already spread. Moreno had mapped the breaches. Moreno had marked the safe routes. Moreno had saved them when command froze. Soldiers who once smirked now greeted her with nods. Some even saluted first. But the reckoning wasn't over. That afternoon, a black sedan rolled into Falcon Ridge. No convoy, no fanfare, just one vehicle, dust clinging to its tires. Out stepped Brigadier General Isaac Langston, folder in hand, his expression unreadable. He didn't pause at the command office. He walked straight to the security post where Cross was waiting, logs piled in defense. Langston opened the folder. Inside was a photo, a young woman, sharp-eyed, hair tied back, standing in front of a row of classified drones 2 years prior. The caption, Moreno, L. Systems Analysis, Special Contingency Program. Cross blinked. What is this?" Langston's tone was ice. "That's the soldier you dismissed. The one who identified system anomalies before your staff even noticed. The one whose doctrine notes included Tempest aura." He placed the folder flat on the desk. She didn't stumble onto a phrase. She was tested for it. Cross's mouth went dry. Tested. Langston's eyes didn't waver. Moreno was cleared for contingency code recognition. She wasn't supposed to activate it, but she was trained to know when to trust it. And you mocked her until the compound nearly fell. The silence that followed was heavier than the blackout had been. By dusk, a new sign had been mounted at the perimeter gate, the Moreno Watch, in honor of quiet vigilance. No speeches, no ceremony, just a plaque, a post, and a soldier who stood her shift as she always had, straight-backed, notebook in hand, coffee steaming against the night. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply turned a page in her notebook and wrote 6 words at the top. Respect is earned in silence daily. And from that night forward, Falcon Ridge never laughed at dusk again.